The First Mission, Cádiz, 1805. Spain, then a reluctant ally of Napoleon, was boiling with discontent. Smugglers and guerrilla fighters were everywhere. British naval intelligence feared America was secretly aiding rebels, while French agents hunted anyone suspected of leaking information. Into this chaos stepped Jonathan Hale, 22 years old, posing as an interpreter for an American shipping company. In Cádiz, he lived in a cramped room above a tannery, the air heavy with the stench of hides. By day, he translated letters. By night, he met with local intellectuals, many of whom dreamed of a Spain freed from French domination and absolutist rule. Hale's role was not to lead, but to listen, to map out the factions, the ideologies, the men who could one day shape a different Europe. It was here he first encountered the concept of the hidden republics. It began with a whispered name: Los Republicanos de la Sombra, the Republicans of the Shadows. According to a Cádiz professor and clandestine revolutionary named Dr. Joaquin Valdez, there existed an informal, secretive network of Republican idealists stretching from Paris to Caracas to Philadelphia. Not a conspiracy in the modern sense, more like a philosophical brotherhood that exchanged letters, funds, safe passage, and ideas. Their goal? Not to overthrow kings directly, but to ensure that whenever tyranny collapsed, republicanism, not monarchy, would rise in its place. Jonathan initially dismissed it as romantic nonsense, but then he saw the emblem, a brass seal nearly identical to the one discovered beneath the Capitol in 1939, engraved with the Latin phrase, "Whoever held this last," he said, "must have been close to us, a traveler between worlds." Jonathan said nothing, but a cold shiver traveled up his spine. Was this his own future being shown to him? Cádiz in 1805 was not merely a port city, it was a listening post for the entire Mediterranean. British frigates lurked just outside the harbor. French officers strutted in and out of taverns. Spanish nobles desperately clung to influence, while revolutionaries plotted in corners over cheap sherry. Hale walked its labyrinth of alleys with the quiet awareness of a man learning to live between worlds. Every day brought a fresh intrigue: a coded letter smuggled inside a loaf of bread, a British officer slipping out of a brothel with a Spanish map tucked beneath his cloak, a French spy found floating face down in the harbor. Hale reported all of it back to Washington, carefully, cautiously, through merchants and couriers who had no idea what they carried. But what truly alarmed him was not the chaos of Cádiz. It was the pattern forming behind the chaos. The same names, Paris, Caracas, Boston, Cádiz, appearing again and again in letters. The same emblem, the brass seal surfacing in unexpected places. The same whispered phrase, Las Repúblicas Ocultas, the hidden republics. At first, Jonathan dismissed the idea that such a network truly existed. But the more he saw, the more letters he translated, the more meetings he attended, the less he doubted it. There was a network, and it was growing. The night of the lanterns. The moment everything changed came on a damp October night during a massive Cádiz festival known as the Noche de los Faroles, the Night of the Lanterns. Streets glowed with candles inside paper globes, children danced, sailors drank, the air smelled of citrus and smoke. Hale was walking through the square when he noticed 3 lanterns glowing in a triangular pattern, held by men who didn't seem to be celebrating. A signal. He followed them. The men led him through twisting alleys to a decaying warehouse near the waterfront. As Jonathan slipped inside, he saw a gathering of nearly 30 people, professors, sailors, soldiers, merchants, a cross-section of Spanish society united by whispered ideals. Dr. Joaquin Valdez stood at the center. On a table before him lay the brass emblem with the Latin inscription, Sigillium Republicarum Occultum. Valdez beckoned Jonathan forward. "You have been watching us," the professor said softly. "Now you shall see us." The Oath of the Hidden Republics. The gathering was not a council of rebels plotting immediate revolt. It was something far older and far more patient, a circle of thinkers and activists exchanging intelligence, spreading Republican ideas throughout Europe and the Americas, ensuring no monarchy went unchallenged. There were similar cells in Paris, in Geneva, in London, and reportedly in Philadelphia, though Valdez winked as he said it, as if he expected Jonathan to know more than he did. Jonathan watched as each member placed a hand on the brass emblem and spoke the same quiet vow. "Where tyranny rises, we carry the spark. Where liberty falters, we guard the flame." And then Valdez did something Jonathan never anticipated. He called Jonathan forward. The crowd parted. The emblem was placed before him. "America is the first modern republic, but she cannot stand alone. We ask only this, that you witness us, know we exist, and when you meet others like us in foreign lands, remember this night." Jonathan hesitated. Was this treason, or was it something deeper? A quiet pact among people who believed, as Jefferson did, that the rights of man belonged to all. Jonathan placed his hand on the emblem. The metal was warm, almost strangely so. He recited the oath, and from that moment on, he was no longer merely an American envoy. He was a keeper of a secret older than he realized. A mission interrupted. 2 months later, in December 1805, Jonathan received urgent orders from Washington. He was to leave Spain immediately and rendezvous with an American merchant ship, the Providence Star, bound for Boston. The ship never made it. Jonathan boarded without incident. For 2 days, the voyage was peaceful, clear skies, calm seas. On the 3rd night, while Jonathan slept in his cramped cabin, a sharp jolt threw him from his bunk. Shouts erupted on deck. He staggered topside to find the crew staring at a strange silhouette on the horizon. A ship with no lanterns, no flags, no markings, closing in fast. "Privateers!" someone shouted. But Jonathan knew better. Privateers flew colors, if only to avoid being hanged as pirates. This ship wanted no identification. Within minutes, it was alongside them. Grappling hooks flew. Armed boarding parties swarmed over the rails. Jonathan fought alongside the crew, swinging a belaying pin with desperate accuracy, but they were outnumbered. Then a man stepped onto the deck, a tall officer with a scar across his jaw, wearing a British naval coat with the insignia torn off. His name, Jonathan later learned, was Elias Blackthorne, and he already knew Jonathan's name. "You're coming with us," Blackthorne said. Jonathan tried to speak, but Blackthorne struck him in the gut with the butt of a pistol. The world blurred. When he regained consciousness, he was aboard the mysterious vessel, the HMS Selkirk, though the British Admiralty would later claim no such ship ever existed. Behind them, the Providence Star burned, no survivors. A U.S. Navy brig, the USS Hornet, had intercepted the unidentified ship. Within minutes, the Selkirk erupted in chaos. Cannonballs smashed the deck, fire spread. Blackthorne fled to a raft with a handful of men. Jonathan seized the moment, broke free of his restraints, and dove overboard as the burning ship began to sink. The freezing Atlantic nearly took him, but sailors from the Hornet hauled him aboard. The mystery ship vanished beneath the waves. A warning from Washington. Returning to Boston months later, Jonathan was met with a startling reception. He expected interrogation, suspicion, perhaps even accusations of treason for associating with foreign Republican groups. Instead, he was escorted directly to President Thomas Jefferson. The president dismissed aides and spoke to Jonathan in private. "We know of the network," Jefferson said quietly, "and we know foreign powers seek to infiltrate or destroy it." Jonathan tried to ask questions, but Jefferson shook his head. "The fewer answers you have, the safer you remain." Then Jefferson placed a hand on Jonathan's shoulder. "Mr. Hale, the world is turning. Empires are dying. New nations are being born. You have a gift, one this republic desperately needs." Jonathan felt the weight of the moment. "You will go where we cannot send soldiers, and speak where we cannot be heard." A long silence. Then Jefferson handed him a small velvet pouch. Inside was a brass emblem, a twin to the one from Cádiz, and Jonathan understood. Jonathan Hale returned from his near-death ordeal on the Selkirk to an America teetering on the edge of disaster. British blockade strangled trade, European wars disrupted commerce, tensions soared as British ships seized American sailors, forcing them into the Royal Navy. By 1812, President Madison declared war. The United States, barely 3 decades old, found itself fighting the world's greatest naval empire. Jonathan was summoned not by the War Department, but by Secretary of State James Monroe, who had read Hale's Cádiz reports and the President's private notes. Monroe spoke plainly. "Canada will be the battlefield, but Europe will decide the war. We need intelligence, and we need men who understand the hidden networks shaping the future of republics." Jonathan understood instantly. This wasn't just a war between nations, it was a war of ideas. The secret directive. Monroe slid a handwritten letter across his desk. The handwriting was unmistakably President Madison's. "Mr. Hale is to move invisibly through Britain and the continent. He is to observe, to report, to persuade where possible. He must determine whether the monarchies will crush the Republican idea before it finds its full voice in the Western Hemisphere." Jonathan stared at the letter. It was authorization and a warning. The British hadn't forgotten him. Captain Elias Blackthorne, the man who tortured him aboard the illicit Selkirk, was rumored to have resurfaced inside the Royal Navy's shadow networks. Hale asked one question. "Do I travel under our flag?" Monroe shook his head. "You travel under no flag at all." Thus began one of the least-known American operations of the entire War of 1812, a lone diplomatic ghost slipping across enemy borders to protect not just America, but the very notion of republic. A capital of espionage. Jonathan entered London under a forged Portuguese identity. The city was a maze of soot-blackened buildings, horse-drawn carriages rattling across cobblestones, and newspapers shouting from every corner, "War with America! Britain must crush the upstart republic!" The city buzzed with spies from every power: Russia, France, Prussia, Austria. Britain itself was fractured. Some politicians demanded America's destruction. Others viewed the war as a distraction from the true threat: Napoleon. Jonathan made contact with sympathizers of parliamentary reform, men who quietly admired America but dared not speak openly. In taverns filled with smoke, they whispered of a future Britain where the people, not the crown, commanded power. And then Jonathan encountered the most unexpected ally of all, a British nobleman. Lord Henry Wilcox, the aristocrat who hated aristocracy. Wilcox was a member of the House of Lords, known publicly as a poet and philanthropist. Privately, however, he was a member of London's cell of the Hidden Republics. Jonathan nearly choked when Wilcox casually presented a brass emblem identical to the one Jonathan carried. "Ah," Wilcox said with a smile, "so the Americans are keeping the flame as well." Jonathan was stunned. "You know of us?" Hale asked. Wilcox leaned forward, lowering his voice. "My dear boy, half the revolutions of the last 20 years have depended on men like us, men who believe liberty should not be the privilege of birth." The world shifted under him. This network, this league of Republicans, was far older, far deeper, far more interconnected than he had ever imagined. Wilcox provided intelligence about British plans, troop movements, and naval strategies, information that later helped American negotiators in Ghent. But with that information came a warning. "Captain Elias Blackthorne has returned, and he is looking for you." Jonathan felt ice crawl up his spine. Blackthorne, the man who kidnapped him, tortured him, sank his ship, the man who had ties to British intelligence units that didn't officially exist. If Blackthorne found him now, it would not end with another interrogation. The encounter at Whitehall. Jonathan hoped to avoid Blackthorne entirely. Fate disagreed. One night, after leaving a meeting near the Strand, Jonathan noticed a shadow detach itself from a doorway. Jonathan's pulse quickened. He stepped deeper into the fog, but the footsteps behind him grew louder.